If I explain you Jira, SQL, Excel, Power BI, and few other tools today, does that make you a business analyst? Probably not. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see beginners make. They hear that business analysts are in demand, they search for a course, and the first thing they start learning is SQL, then Excel, then Power BI, then Jira, then maybe API. And after learning all these tools, they still don't know one very important thing. What exactly am I supposed to do when I join a real project? If you have ever felt confused about this, don't worry, you are not alone. Because the real skills of a business analyst is not knowing 20 different tools. The real skill is knowing how to understand a business problem, ask the right questions, analyze the information, and help the team build the right solution. And in this video, I'm going to explain the 10 skills you actually need to develop as a business analyst. And I'm not going to explain them like a textbook. I'm going to use one project throughout this course. And by the end of this video, you will understand why these skills are much more important than simply collecting tools. So let's start. Before we talk about the skills, I want you to understand the project we are going to use as an example throughout this course. Imagine a large company, and this company works with thousands of suppliers. Every day, the company needs information about these suppliers. For example, supplier name, supplier address, contact information, tax information, bank information, supplier type, business details, and many other pieces of information. Now imagine that different teams are maintaining this information in different places. One team has an Excel file, another team has an old application, someone has information in an email, and the ERP system has another version of the supplier information. Now you can imagine what happens. There could be a duplicate supplier, there could be incorrect information, an address might be outdated. A supplier's name might be different in two systems. Some information may be missing. And when another business process needs supplier information, they don't know which information is correct. This is a real business problem, right? So the company decides to build a supplier management portal. This will be an internal application. The internal business users will use this portal to create suppliers, update supplier information, review it, validate it, and manage the supplier's master data. Once the information is properly reviewed and approved, the trusted supplier information can be published to company's ERP system. So it's very simple. Internal user creates or updates supplier, then it will be validated, reviewed, and get approved. Then it will be published to ERP. That's our project. And don't worry if terms like MDM or ERP are new to you. We will learn them later. For now, just understand the business problem. The company wants to maintain one trusted version of supplier information and make that information available to the systems that needs it. Now let's come back to our main topic. What skill does a business analyst need to work on a project like this? There are 10 important ones. The first skill is requirement gathering. This is one of the most important things you will do as a BA. Let's say your business stakeholder comes to you and say, we need a supplier management portal. That's all they will tell you. Now, can you give this requirement to a developer? No, right? Because we don't have the complete information yet. What does the user needs to do? Should the user create a new supplier? Should the user update an existing supplier? What information should be captured? Which fields are mandatory? Who can create a supplier? Who can approve it? Should every change required approval? What happens if supplier already exists? What happens if somebody enters incorrect information? When should the information be sent to the ERP? There are so many questions, and that's where the BA comes in. You talk to the business users, you understand their current process, you ask questions, you clarify things, you identify what they actually need. That's requirement gathering. And here is something very important. Requirement gathering does not mean sitting in a meeting and writing down every sentence the stakeholder says. You need to understand the meaning behind what they are saying. Sometimes the stakeholder tells you what they want, but your job is to understand why they want it and what problems they are trying to solve. That's the first skill. Now let's say you have gathered all the information. Is your job finished? No. Now comes requirement analysis. Let's take a simple example. The business says we need the ability to create a supplier. Okay, that's a high level requirement. But what exactly does create a supplier means? What information should the user enter? Supplier name, supplier type, address, country, tax information, bank details, contact information, what fields are mandatory, can the same supplier already exist? Should the system check for duplication? Who can create the supplier? Who can approve it? What happens after approval? Should the system send the approved supplier to the ERP? Now we are analyzing the requirement. We are taking a simple statement and breaking it down into smaller questions and requirements. So remember this difference. Requirement gathering is about collecting and understanding information. Requirement analysis is about thinking through that information and making it clear, complete, and usable. A good BA doesn't just write what the stakeholder says, a good BA thinks about what could be missing. The third skill is communication, and I want to spend a little time on this because many beginners worry about it. You might think, my English isn't perfect. Can I really become a business analyst? Yes, you can. You don't need complicated English. You don't need to use big words. You need to be able to understand people and explain things clearly. As a BA, you will communicate with many different people: business users, developers, testers, product owners, managers, data teams, and maybe external stakeholders. Let's say a business user says, we need a supplier information to be available in ERP. A developer might ask, when should we send the data? A tester might ask, what happens if the ERP doesn't accept the data? A business user might ask, can we update the suppliers after its approval? These are the different questions about the same business requirement. Your job is to bring all of this together. So communication is not about sounding impressive. It's about making sure that the business, development, and testing team all have the same understanding. That's what a good BA communication looks like. The fourth skill is stakeholder management. Let's first understand what a stakeholder means. A stakeholder is basically someone who is involved in the project, affected by the project, or has an interest in the outcome. In our supplier management project, we could have many stakeholders. We could have procurement team, finance, compliance, supplier management, data governance, IT, ERP team, business managers, and the internal users who will actually use the portal. Now here is where things become interesting. These people may not always agree. For example, the business may say, we want users to update supplier information quickly. But the data governance team may say, every important change must go through an approval process. Now, what do? You don't simply say, okay, the business wants it, so let's do it. And you also don't say, data governance said no, so we can't do it. You need to understand both sides. Why does the business wants the change? Why does governance require approval? Is there another solution? Maybe some fields can be updated directly, maybe sensitive fields require approval, maybe certain changes can follow a different workflow. This is stakeholder management, and these skills become more and more important as you grow in your BA career. The fifth skill is problem solving. This is really the heart of business analysis. A company doesn't hire a BA just because they need someone to write documents. There is usually a problem and somebody needs to understand the problem. Let's go back to our supplier example. Imagine the company has 20,000 suppliers. Supplier information is maintained across different systems. Some suppliers are duplicated. Some information is outdated. Some teams don't know which information is correct. And because of this, other business processes are getting affected. The company says, we need a supplier management portal. Now, if you are a beginner, you might immediately start thinking about screens. Okay, we will create a supplier screen, but you have to stop there. First, understand the problem. Why are the duplicates? Why is the information different between systems? Who is allowed to change the supplier information? How is the information correctly maintained? Which system is considered the source? How is the information sent to ERP today? Where are the delays? Where are the errors happening? Those questions help us understand the real problem. And once you understand the problem, you can help define the right solution. So always remember, don't start with the solution, start with the problem. That's a very important BA mindset. The sixth skill is process analysis. A business analyst should understand how the business actually works. Let's say today the company has this process. An internal employee receives a request to create a supplier. They collect information, they check the information, maybe they send an email to another team. That team validates some details. Someone creates the supplier in another system, another team checks it. Eventually the supplier information reaches the ERP. Now imagine you are the BA. Before designing the new system, you need to understand this current process. Who does each step? What information is needed? Where does the information come from? Which system is being used? Where does the process stop? Where are the delays? Where can errors happen? Which steps are manual? Which steps can be automated? This is process analysis. Later we are going to learn how to represent these process visually using process maps and BPMN. But before learning the notation, you need to learn how to think about a process. Because a BA should not create a diagram just because someone asked for a diagram. You create it because it helps you understand and communicate how the business works. The seventh skill is documentation. You will have meetings, you will have discussions, you will gather requirements, you will make decisions, but if none of that is documented properly, the team can easily become confused. That's why documentation is important. Depending on the project, a BA may create requirements, user stories, acceptance criteria, business rules, process diagrams, wireframes, meeting notes, decision logs, and other project documents. But here is something I want you to remember. Good BA documentation doesn't mean writing a 50-page document for everything. The goal here is clarity. Suppose you write a requirement and the developer reads it. They should understand what needs to be built. The tester reads it, they should understand what needs to be tested. And if the business stakeholder reads it, they should understand what they asked for. If everyone understands the same thing, your documentation is doing its job. So don't focus on writing more, focus on writing clearly. Now we come to technical understanding. And this is where many people from non-IT background become nervous. They hear SQL, API, database, backend, front end, JSON, integration, ERP, and they think, do I have to become a developer? No, you don't. As a BA, you should understand the basics. For example, in our project, an internal user enters supplier information into the portal. That information goes to the application's backend. The backend stores the information in a database. The system may perform validations, it may communicate with other systems, and after approval, the supplier information may be published to the ERP. You don't need to build all of these things yourself, but you should understand what is happening. If a developer tells you we need an API to publish the approved supplier record to ERP, you should have a basic understanding of what that means. If someone says we found duplicate supplier records in the database, you should understand what they are talking about. That's technical understanding. So again, you don't need to become a developer, but you should become comfortable working with technology. The ninth skill is domain knowledge. Domain simply means the business area you are working in. Healthcare, banking, insurance, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, and so on. Why is domain knowledge important? Because the better you understand the business, the easier it becomes to understand the requirements. Let's say you are working on a supplier management project. If you understand how procurement works, how supplier management works, how ERP works, and why company needs accurate supplier information, you will understand the requirements much faster. And this is one thing I strongly recommend throughout your BA career. Don't only learn tools, learn the business, because companies don't hire business analysts just because they know Jira. They hire BAs because they need people who can understand the business and translate that understanding into a solution. And later in this course, we are going to cover domain knowledge as well. We will start with simple concepts and gradually move into more specific domains. And finally, the 10th skill is critical thinking. And honestly, this is one of the skills that can really separate a good BA from an average BA. Let me give you a simple example. Suppose the business says, we want users to update supplier information. A beginner might write, system should allow users to update supplier information. But an experienced BA start thinking, which users, which information, can they change everything? Can they change the supplier name? Can they change the bank details? Can they change the tax information? What happens after they change it? Does someone need to approve it? Should the old value be stored? Do we need an audit history? What happens if the information is invalid? What happens if two people try to update the same supplier? Should the change be published to ERP immediately or only after approval? Now you are thinking like a BA. You are not just looking at the happy part, you are thinking about what can go wrong, what happens next, who is affected, what are the exceptions, what rules do we need. That's critical thinking, and this is something you develop with practice. You don't become good at it overnight. The more projects you work on, the more questions you learn to ask. So what are the 10 skills? Let's quickly go through them one more time. Number 1, requirement gathering. Number 2, requirement analysis. Number 3, communication. Number 4, stakeholder management. Number 5, problem solving. Number 6, process analysis. Number 7, documentation. Number 8, technical understanding. Number 9, domain knowledge. And the final one is critical thinking. Now look at this list carefully. Where are Jira and SQL? Where is Power BI? Where is Excel? Where is Confluence? They are not missing. We are going to learn them, but they are tools. And this is the point I really want you to remember. A tool does not make you a business analyst. If you know Jira but you don't know how to gather requirements, Jira won't make you a good BA. If you know SQL but you don't understand the business problem, SQL won't make you good BA. If you know Power BI but you don't know how to communicate with stakeholders, Power BI won't make you a good BA. Tools support your work, but your thinking, analysis, communication, and understanding of the business are what make you a good BA. Now, throughout this course, we are going to develop all these skills, and we are not going to learn them randomly. We are going to build everything step by step, and we are going to keep coming back to our Supplier Management Portal project. So when we learn requirements, we will work with requirements for this project. When we learn stakeholder management, we will identify the stakeholders for this project. When we learn process analysis, we will analyze the supplier management process. When we learn BPMN, we will create the process for this project. When we learn user stories, we will write actual user stories for this project. When we learn acceptance criteria, we will write acceptance criteria for those stories. When we learn wireframes, we will design screens for our portal. When we learn SQL, we will work with supplier data. When we learn APIs, we will understand how our portal communicates with other systems. When we learn Jira, we will manage our project requirements in Jira, and eventually we will take this project through development, testing, UAT, and release. So you are not going to learn hundreds of disconnected concepts. We are going to connect everything, and that's very important, because when you finally join a real project, nobody is going to tell you, today you need to use your BPMN skill, tomorrow you need to use your stakeholder management skills. Real projects don't work like that. Everything happens together. You might be gathering requirements, talking to a stakeholder, looking at a process, writing a user story, discussing something with a developer, clarifying something with QA, all in the same day. That's what I want you to understand through this course. And if you are watching this and you are from a non-IT background, I want you to remember one thing. You don't have to know everything today. Maybe you don't know SQL, maybe you have never heard of an API, maybe you have never used Jira, maybe you have never created a BPMN diagram. That's okay. We are going to learn these things step by step. But don't make the mistake of thinking that learning tools alone will make you a business analyst. First, learn how to think like a BA. Understand the problem, ask questions, understand the business, understand the users, analyze the requirements, communicate clearly, and then use the right tools to support your work. That's the approach we are going to follow throughout this entire course. So if you are serious about becoming a business analyst, don't just watch random videos from this series. Start from the beginning and follow the journey, because we are going to start with the basics and gradually move towards a complete real world project. If you found this video valuable, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.